So this past weekend, I was going through the assignment you posted on Moodle for the reflection, and I thought I had picked an article. I was like, yeah, I can do my reflection on this, and it still wasn't something I was feeling passionate about. I was like, yeah, that's the one. So I kind of looked at the assignment again, and I went through the movie titles and videos, and I saw The Third Way, and I had no idea what that was. So I googled it and found that short documentary about the Catholic Church's teachings on homosexuality, and in order to, I think, set the reflection up and kind of qualify why that's what I chose, I'll give you a little backstory. My best friend in the world's name is Brent. We met in fourth grade when I changed schools. So I was a new kid, new school year, and when I got to my classroom for the first time, it was set up in tables of two, and I was assigned to sit next to this kid, Brent, and um, I was really, I'm not a shy person, but I was really shy and kind of reserved, and kind of feeling my way around this new environment. And he was super gregarious guy, and immediately was like, we're going to be friends whether you like it or not. And he made what would have been, or what could have been, a really difficult transition for me as a child really pretty seamless, because he was immediately, somebody that was there for me. He was immediately a friend, and it remains so to this day. And there, so anyway, obviously, Brent has come out as gay. That's why this kind of is near and dear to me, and it's really because of what Brent went through as we were growing up. When you're in fourth grade, sexuality is not really something that's on your radar. Um, but as we got older, I'd say around eighth grade, it became apparent to our cohort, the people that were in our class or our school, that Brent was gay, and I know that that's really not fair to say, or it's not fair for us to have assumed that he was gay, but from the closed-minded part of the world that we were from, that was our conclusion. And I watched him be absolutely unmercifully bullied all through high school, most of middle school, and it really changed him. He was really beaten down, and even I'm ashamed to say that I succumbed to the for pressures from what I was seeing with how they were treating him, and I kind of distanced myself from him. It was like, if it's okay for us to be friends on the weekends, but in school, I'm going to pretend I don't know you. And I would give anything to go back in time and take that back. I would give anything. And when I talked to Brent about that, he says that he doesn't blame me. He said, he said, I wouldn't want you to have felt as miserable as I did. And that's such a heartbreaking thing for him to say, I'll take all this burden onto me. I'm kind of glad you weren't standing up for me, because that would have just caused problems for you. And that's not fair. Anyway, that's just the kind of guy he is. So one of the other things that Brent really struggled with was his family, and their acceptance or lack thereof of him. And it was because of, I don't know what it was because. It's not fair to make that assumption, but I know that he had a really, really hard time with his church, and his family was very involved in their church. And we lived in the Bible Belt. I was one of like 4 Catholics, I think, in the entire high school, with 1,200. And he wasn't Catholic. He was I don't know what his religious beliefs were, what church his family belonged to. Some Protestant church. I'm not sure which one. That certainly I went with him many times to that church, and it was fire and brimstone. And any time that anything that had something to do with homosexuality was in the news or part of the national conversation, there was inevitably some sermon about that really, really cemented Brent's belonging in his church family. So anyway, I watched the documentary. I got some thoughts about it, and I talked to Brent, and he watched it, and I kind of bounced some ideas off of him, and so came up with my reflection that way. So to begin, I think the Catholic Church is to be lauded for promoting unconditional acceptance and love as Jesus taught. And it's nice to know that the church is attempting to provide a spiritual home for anybody that feels that like they don't have one, and in this case, the homosexual community. Um, Having seen Brent go through what he went through when the church was such a big part of his life, and how he was afraid that he would be ostracized and thrown away, cast out if he was true to himself, he lived an authentic life. That was pretty painful to watch. So I think it's great that the Catholic Church does that, and that I think it's mission critical for any church to teach welcoming forgiveness, in order to be consistent with the teachings of Jesus Christ. Um, so we learned in lecture that when you were teaching us about Genesis and the creation story and how Catholics read Genesis, that the Scripture says that our likeness to God is in our sexuality, that the maleness and femaleness and that union, that communion, is an expression of His image. And that outside of lecture, the Catechism says that actions are not sin, but that desires. Actions are a sin, but the desires are not a sin. And essentially the church is saying that we know you weren't afforded a choice when you were born on anything. So, we can't, it's not fair to assume that it's a sin just to be gay in nature. But it's that the action of, acting on your sexual desires as a homosexual is not acceptable. And that's consistent with the church's teachings about contraception, for example, and how the church views sex in general as a method for procreation. And so, I can understand that belief system and that dogma. But the video really lost me in a couple places, and one of them was where one of the gentlemen says pretty dismissively that it's not about saying no to pleasure, no to herpes, no to hell. It's about saying yes to one very important thing, yes to authentic love. So we can kind of just back up and unpack that sentence. It's not about saying no to pleasure, even though it is, because the church is asking you to be chaste. It's not about saying no to herpes. What the hell does that mean? That herpes is a blight on homosexuals for acting on their sexual desires. That's kind of how, I watched this segment of the video like 15 times. And I'm like, did he really say what I think he said? Am I not hearing him right? Am I not taking what he's trying to say correctly? And I think that regardless of whether or not I've interpreted what he's trying to communicate correctly, he did a really horrible job delivering his message. And the third part being, after the no to herpes part, was no to hell. So it's a very succinct way of saying, you have to comply with a chaste life that in order to have that authentic love. Talking like a New Yorker, right? So the video goes on to say that the chaste person is not an asexual person. We realize that the chaste person is the person who knows what to do with their sexuality. And then there's crickets. There's no, what do you do with your sexuality? Well, obviously you have to shelve it. And so when I was discussing, I had problems with this, and I don't feel like I have to agree with every single thing the church teaches, and I can still be a part of and respect the church. That's my own personal view, right or wrong. When I was talking to Brent about it, and normally somebody who's really even keeled, you can really treat this dude like a dog, and he'll come back and be your best buddy. He got pretty aggravated also, and it wasn't that he was playing off me. I hadn't even brought this part up in the video when he brought it up, and he says, I can appreciate that the Catholic Church is providing a spiritual home, kind of like what I said earlier, and I did kind of steal his words there. But he says, the church says you're welcome here, and we'll provide a family, and we will be a solution for you. But you'll never enjoy the same communion that traditionally married couples have, nor the joy of creating your own children as God intended. He said, not being able to create children, I suppose, is the very, evidence that the church has for saying that these acts are not part of God's plan. And he accepted. I appreciate that argument as well. He says, "I'll never be married to anyone of the same gender in the eyes of God. That I can enjoy the companionship and the care and love throughout my life, even by living with someone of the same gender, as long as I'm okay with spending each and every single day fighting the temptation to act on my sexual desires for what could potentially be decades." He said, and if you think that's going to be too much temptation, that you can enjoy the companionship of who? The church for Mass. How many times are Mass offered a week? 5, 6 times a week. I can go for an hour and be part of a family, and then I get to go home to my empty house and console my loneliness with the awareness of the resounding yes that I choose to live with authentic love. And he was really pretty defensive, is how I read his email. But I can't say that I disagree with his position on it, that I think it's a big ask. I think that the choice, if you're born as a heterosexual person and you choose to live a chaste life, if you join the priesthood, for example, or if you become a nun and you take a vow of chastity, you made a choice that you had control over. And you can also choose to step out of that life. But they don't have that choice. So while it may be a good option for some homosexuals, I still don't believe, and that it is, and Brent doesn't either, that it is going to be the mentally healthy choice for many. So I think that's a good place to stop. I am admittedly not the best orator on earth, so I hope I was able to get my point across. I hope it, at the very least, is thought-provoking, maybe a little bit entertaining, and yeah. So thanks. I'll see you in class.